of this week. Thank you, Mohammed. Sorry, I know you said to let you know. So thank you to everyone who's come back today. We're making progress here. I know we've covered a lot already, and there's still a fair bit that we're going to be covering, but it does get more interesting, I promise you. On Mondays and Tuesdays, we're meeting for a short period, so we'll get straight into it, and hopefully I'll be able to take some questions at the end. If I don't get to your questions today, as usual, we'll take them tomorrow. So today we're starting with lesson 5, and we're going to talk about how you as a BA would plan your work on the job, and what does monitoring look like. What are the key documents that you may need to work on, the key activities that you may be performing on the job. Bear in mind that, again, no two BAs are the same, right? So even though the general requirements of your work as a BA may be similar to the next BA, but the uniqueness of your business will differentiate what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day from what the other BA will be doing. Okay, so as a BA, one of the things you want to do is you want to plan your work, and you want to understand what are the different moving parts of your day-to-day on your job, right? What are the deliverables that are required of you? What methodology will your company be following? Usually, the decision on whether it be waterfall or agile, chances are they've made that decision even before they hired you. Or maybe they haven't made it and they brought you on board and they're seeking your opinion as well. Now you know waterfall, you know agile. There are other methodologies out there, Kanban and so many other types of hybrid, but chances are when you get hired, it'd be waterfall or agile. Those two are the most common. Waterfall less common, less prevalent. Agile is what a lot of companies use, and sometimes they do a combination of agile and waterfall. The key thing is you know what they both entail. So if you were faced with it, you'd know how to carry yourself. Okay, we'll talk about understanding the different roles and responsibilities on a project, right? Because remember, as a BA, you're going to be working in a project environment. You're going to be working with chances are you're going to be working in a project environment, and there are many other people you're going to be interfacing with. How do you determine how you're going to go about engaging with each person? I'm sure you know that the way you'd engage with the VP will be different from the way you'd engage with the marketing department. You will be respectful towards all of them, right? But these are just, two different roles in the organization, right? What you'd even need from them would be different. Okay, so how do you understand who falls into what bucket? And that is what the RACI matrix will tell us. Some people call it RACI, but I think it's called pronounced RACI. Okay, and then we'll talk about your deliverables as a BA on the job. So let's look at this table here. Hope I didn't jump anything here. Okay, so let's look at this diagram here. We have these 4 quadrants, right? On the left side of all 4 boxes, we have the power interest, right? Actually, it's called the power interest diagram, right? On the left side, you can see where they wrote power or influence, right? What that is talking about is what level of power does this stakeholder have? And then on the y-axis, we have the level of interest. So I'll demystify that in a bit. Let's look at the boxes we have here. Box 1, so top left says keep satisfied. Top right, manage closely. Bottom left, monitor. And bottom right, keep informed. So what are we talking about here? All stakeholders that you're going to be engaging with will fall into one of these buckets here. The one that is keep satisfied, if you look at this arrow for the y-axis, right, this arrow that goes up, can you see my cursor? Can anybody see my cursor moving?
Yes, we can.
You do? Okay, good. So if you look at this arrow here, it starts from low and it goes to high. What does this tell us? Anybody who falls in this top left box has high power. But what about their level of interest? They fall on low, right? So this box here, even though it's up here, if you trace it down, you can see that the level of interest is low, but the level of power is high. Okay, let's look at manage closely. Manage closely, the level of power is high, right? Because if you trace it to the left, you can see it is high. But if you trace it down, the level of interest is high as well. So manage closely is high and high. Keep satisfied is high for power, but their interest in your project is low. If you look at the bottom left, we have monitor. The level of power is low. The level of interest is low as well. They're not particularly interested in what you're doing. In fact, if you talk to them too much, they begin to feel like you're bothering them. Then we have the fourth box, which is keep informed. For keep informed, the level of interest is high, right? We see that here. But the level of power, if you trace it to the left, is low. So I'll give you like 10 seconds just to look at that closely again before I begin to explain what each box means. Just take a moment to see where each box falls. Okay, so we'll continue on here. What are we looking at here? Let's go to the next tab. So when you have someone who's high power, high interest, where does that fall? This is high power, high interest. Manage closely. These are the people you want to manage closely on the project, right? These people need to be managed actively and kept informed of each step in the project. They will be instrumental in achieving the outcomes. Now, for every project, it may differ, right? Typically, you have someone in management here. They have high power, like they're powerful enough to say, you know what, we're shutting down this project and we're firing everybody. They have enough power to do that. And they're interested, right? They're interested because they have a stake in it. They've approved 3,500,000 for this project, right? So it is in their best interest for that project to not fail. They are very interested in what is going on. When you're on a project as a BA, you need to know who falls in this category. You do not want to make them unhappy for any reason. In fact, if you begin to see that they're unhappy, you'd have a conversation with your PM to say, oh, is there anything we need to do? You're having conversations just to make sure your high power, high interest category, they're happy. Regular status update. They should be getting that. They shouldn't have to ask for status update. That would be, managed by your project manager usually. But because the BA is always supporting the project manager, right? You may be hands-on on this as well. So I think we get the gist of high power, high interest. So what we're saying here is when you get on a project, right? Start thinking about your ratio. Who falls where? Because you don't want to engage with someone in this category like you were engaging with someone in this category. You do not want to do that. Those are mistakes that when you make, it takes a while for you to redeem yourself. So one of the ways to avoid that is know who falls where. When you're scheduling a meeting and the type of updates you're giving should go to the high power, high interest category, you don't want to exclude one person and they find out later that the meeting held without them. So where I currently work, there's a project we're working on, right? And of course, there's the organogram, right? There's like different levels of approvals, different levels of communication. So we're working on this request for whatever that document is, right? And we got to the point where we needed to send it out to vendors. So before we send it out to vendors, we were inviting, I think it was the VP of something to, we had this meeting to have a conversation about the requirements and, this is what we're going to be sending to the vendor. So we get into this meeting and one of the things the VP said is, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. Has the director seen this document? So what he was saying is, you've come to talk to me about this document. Obviously, the VP is ahead of the director. The director has a lot of experience. So if there was anything that needed to be updated in that document, if we had showed it to the director before bringing it to the VP, the impression I got from the way the VP was talking about it was, if the director has seen this document before you bring it to me, then I'm confident in what you're about to show me. But if the director did not see this document before you brought it to me, I'm concerned. Are you going to be wasting my time? He didn't say it in those exact words, but all of us in the meeting could read between the lines. Interestingly enough, the director had not seen the documents. So, of course, nobody was going to lie. This was on the project manager. We had a conversation about it. They had to cut the meeting short because straight up red flags, right? When the VP left the meeting, I don't think I've ever seen a director as annoyed as that director was. That I think he practically said, which I thought wasn't proper language for that type of meeting. Never ever do this again. He was that annoyed. He was so pissed at everybody. I'm like, oh wow, he practically turned red. How do you think that director felt that made him talk that way? That is a trap you do not want to walk into as a BA. Obviously, the PM took the heat that day, but that could have been the BA, right? We need to know who's in our high power, high interest. In our minds, I think the PM categorized the VP as high power, high interest. But even though in our subconscious, the director was also high power, high interest, she hadn't treated it that way because we should not have gone straight to the VP. So that's a practical example of, like people will storm out of a meeting and even raise their voices when you miss, like you're supposed to invite them to a meeting and you don't, things like that. How do you avoid it? By knowing how to categorize people. And if you do not know, ask. Like I always say, there is no expectation that you join the company on day one and you already know who's high power, high interest. No. If you know it's obvious to you in the 1 month you've been hired, fantastic. As a matter of fact, I'd even say validate that with somebody else. Talk to the project manager. Oh, I think, and on the job, nobody's going to be saying, Abiola, so who's high power, high interest? No, they actually don't use that terminology. I'm using the terminology in class because actually that is what it is called, but it's really for you to understand, right? It's for you to understand. So when you get on the job and you're talking to your project manager, you're going to have an idea. This document that we're working on is for the highest level of stakeholders that we're dealing with. So in your mind, you know this is high power, high interest. And then you figure out who needs to be in that meeting. And if you don't know, talk to the PM, talk to the project sponsor. But the first thing is that you need to understand this categorization and the impact it can have on your work as a BA. Okay. So we have the high power, low interest. These are stakeholders that need to be kept satisfied, even though they're not interested in the project. For your project, the category in here will be different from who it is in my own project. But I gave a more general example here that would apply on most projects, right? Most projects in a regulated industry. It would be regulators, right? They're not interested in your project. They could care less that your company is spending $1 million, but they have high power. You do something you shouldn't do on the project, they can shut the project down, they can fine your company. Okay, I'll give an example. Health data, right? The guidelines around health data. So basically, people's health data, or what we call PII, personally identifying information, I think it's called, right? You can't store it outside Canada, something like that. So sometimes people go to the cloud, right? And the servers that this data is going to be stored in is in the US. There's some type of health data that cannot leave Canada, right? So regulators may be very interested to know what your company is doing. Again, who's going to fall into what quadrant for your project will be different from mine. The most important thing is understand that there is a group that is high power, low interest. Again, whether you do your project or not, they don't care. But because you're doing that project, they have a maybe not a stake, but they have enough power to be able to interject basically. Then we have the low power, high interest. This oftentimes will be your end users, right? They don't have any power to derail the project. They can be unhappy, but oftentimes they don't have enough power to derail the project. But they're very interested because maybe this project is automation, whatever it is going to improve their work life, basically. Then we have low power, low interest. This group needs to be monitored. Don't contact them unless you absolutely have to. They don't care that you were even hired. They don't even want to say hello to you. They're busy with other things. Can anybody give me an example of who you think might fall in this category? Any thoughts on that? Precious, you said CSR. What's CSR? We don't want acronyms in here. If you give us an acronym, please tell us what you mean. CSR can be customer service, can be corporate social responsibility, can be anything. Okay, Precious said customer support. Ayokumi said customer. Okay, right. So all good examples, right? I'll give an example of my own. That may be so someone in one of the departments that will not be impacted by this solution. They may have some information that would be useful to you as a BA. You may have a few questions for them here and there, but generally they're not going to be impacted by the outcome of that project. Okay, whether you do the project or you don't do the project, they're fine. And they have low power as well. Okay, so your state, oh yeah, there was a comment here that I wanted to address. Somebody said something about, Henry said, a communication plan may help here perhaps. So your communication plan tells you how to communicate. It doesn't, you still need to identify who you're communicating with, and you need to identify who falls in what quadrant before you determine how you want to communicate. For example, high power, high interest, we're going to have a bi-weekly project status update. That is what your communication plan will do. But in terms of who falls in where, you still need to, that still needs to be figured out before it can even be documented. So what I'm saying is that when they hire you, they may not necessarily just deliver that to you and say, oh, these are the quadrants that your stakeholders fall into, and this is how you should address them. Bear in mind that you may even be the one creating this from scratch. So where will you start from? You need to know who's who. Okay? Stakeholder engagement. Go back. So who's a stakeholder? A stakeholder is someone in the organization who's directly or indirectly impacted by the solution. So I've talked about stakeholders, right? You need to identify the best method to collaborate and communicate with each group of stakeholders. So when I say know how to communicate, I don't mean with each person. When you group people or categorize them, like in the RACI, then you can say, okay, for quadrant one, this is how I'm going to communicate with them. They're typically not people you can just walk into their office and start chatting with, right? Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a weekly or bi-weekly 20 to 30 minutes meeting. Some of these people are so busy that there's some companies where if you want to book a meeting, you need to book it 5 minutes after the start of the hour. So you book a meeting for 3:05, 2:05. There's some companies where they have that culture. Find out what and the reason they do that is if someone is in a meeting 2 to 3 and then you schedule 3 to 4, what if they need a bathroom break? What if they need to grab a cup of water? They would come late to your meeting, right? Which is not deliberate, but every human needs a break from time to time. So, what is the culture of your organization? Find out. You'd be amazed at how these little things will help in your relationship with your stakeholders. Okay, so identify the best method of collaborating and communicating with each group. And then when planning the engagement, understand the degree of complexity. The more people you're communicating with at once, like if you were doing group communication, the more complex it becomes. So if you were doing like a project status meeting and there's typically 5 people in the meeting compared to 25 people, imagine 25 people coming at you and the PM with questions. You better go into that meeting prepared. Because usually you'll be invited to these meetings, usually. And if the PM gets stuck, because again, you as the BA, you should know a lot about your project. They may look to you and say, oh, so Abiola, oh, someone asks a question, they'll be like, oh, that's a very good question. I think Abiola might be able to help here. You see what I mean? I mean, hopefully your PM will pull their weight and not put you on the spot all the time, but you have to be ready. Okay? So for your stakeholder group, okay, you have your internal stakeholders and these are people within your organization that you're working closely with. They have the knowledge, they have the expertise, they will be impacted by the solution. They're the ones with the business needs, they're the ones who know the business rules, right? And then you have the external stakeholders that may be regulators, vendors, auditors, whichever other external party your company is going to be working with on the implementation. So I'll skip over that diagram. Let's talk about a stakeholder management plan. What's a stakeholder management plan? It's a plan that provides a means of capturing information and specifying how to engage with each stakeholder group. Now, I know that I'm talking about these documents, but in reality, what are the chances that you're going to see a stakeholder management plan? Slim, and even if you see one, it's probably a one-page document, right? But I'm saying this again in case you get on that job and they're like, oh, yes, Abiola, can you create a stakeholder management plan? Or this is the stakeholder management plan. Please go read it so that you know how to engage with stakeholders. Okay. What does this document do? It identifies stakeholders, including their role and impact. Okay. And it includes a communication plan for the stakeholders. So, Henry, this is what I was saying, right? First, you need to identify the stakeholders, understand their role, the impact they may or may not have on the project, right? And then you need a plan on how you want to communicate with them. These documents are not usually anything so large, just that it needs to be documented. And again, like I said, a lot of projects will they're neither here nor there on it. The benefit of a document like this is imagine this is a 1 year project. The BA leaves 5 months into the project. They hire you, right? And they're like, in the interview, you told them how you could hit the ground running and all of that. So they expect you to hit the ground running. If all of this is not documented, where do you even start from? Right? So be that BA that when you leave, the next BA isn't thinking, what a quack. And did you really have a BA here, right? Leave good documentation to make the life of the next person easy. Okay, so how do we select stakeholders in a project? When we have a project going on, do we just do like a random selection? Typically not. The project sponsor is a key stakeholder, right? Remember who the project sponsor is? That is the person basically sponsoring the project. The money isn't coming from their pockets, right? However, they're the ones or the one who has gone to make a case for that money to be spent on the project. So this is like a number one stakeholder. And then you'll be asking the project sponsor questions, who else should I be talking to? Okay. The project sponsor may not have all the answers, but they typically would give you a few key people. So the way it works, right? It's like you talk to the project sponsor, and they're like, oh, talk to Thomas in marketing and talk to Greg in sales, right? That's all they have for you. Then when you go talk to Thomas and Greg, they will give you like two other names each, right? And then you talk to those two, those other two will give you like three other names each. And that's how you continue growing your. And another way that plays out is you talk to the marketing manager and be like, oh, in this process, I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I send it off to the sales manager. What does that tell you? That there is a part of this process that is done by the sales department. So what are you going to do? You will seek to meet with the sales manager so that you can understand the other parts of the process, right? And the list continues to grow that way. Okay. As part of stakeholder nomination and identification, we're going to consider all major groups that have interest in the solution or that will be impacted by the solution. The end users that would use this solution, they're part of our stakeholder group, or at least representatives of them will be part of our stakeholder group. What do I mean by that? The marketing department have 100 people. We don't need all 100 of them to be stakeholders. We need a representation, right? So you can work with the marketing manager who would say, oh, team lead 1, team lead 2, team lead 5. All three of them know enough to reflect the knowledge of the 100 that we have in the team. Okay? Stakeholders can also be identified during workshops and interviews. Okay, so as you're talking to people, they're like you're interviewing somebody to understand the process and they tell you about it. And they say things like, somebody who actually really knows this process really well, if they give you a name, right? That may be someone you need to talk to. It may also be from observation. They tell you, oh, observe how the marketing department works. And as you're going, you see there's a particular person that everybody's coming to with questions. What does that tell you? This person knows enough to draw the crowd. Okay. So in analyzing your stakeholders, right, we talked about understanding their level of influence and the level of power, right? Influence is how they can impact the project. Doing this analysis will help you better plan your engagement with them. It also helps you to avoid late emergence of conflicts, right? Conflicts typically happen on projects. It doesn't matter how fantastic the project team is, right? By knowing the stakeholders to talk to and when to talk to them and how to talk to them, you would be able to resolve any conflicts that arise. Number one, the conflicts would arise early, and then you can address them, because if there'll be conflict, the earlier the better. Because once we address the conflict and we will start working better together, then we'll get more results, right? Okay. Analyzing your stakeholders early would also help you misunderstand business needs. If you're gathering requirement from ABC when you should be gathering from XYZ, and you've spent the last 4 months just talking to ABC, only to find out in month 5 that you should be talking to XYZ, you basically wasted 4 months of project money. Not just what they paid the BA, but what they paid the rest of the team. Because those requirements may be incorrect, right? Okay. It helps us avoid implementation of poor solutions as well, because when we talk to the right people, we get the right information and we can build the right solution. Early stakeholder analysis helps prevent communication problems as well, because now we know the people we should be talking to, and we've been able to devise a plan on how to talk to them, when to talk to them. There's some people you can't email randomly. It just doesn't work like that, based on which quadrant they fall into. Okay, and it helps prevent resistance as well. An example of this would be, maybe there's a director that should have been engaging from month 1. You only found out in month 4. The director has heard you've been meeting with people from months 1 to 3. They're waiting for the day you come talk to them so they can unleash on you. You'll be amazed that adults actually behave that way. You don't want to be that BA who's chatting with somebody in month 4 when you should have been doing it from month 1. Okay. So let's look at this ratio chart, right? This chart identifies who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. So responsible can be somebody working on a project, okay? Like somebody who is responsible for an activity or responsible for an outcome, okay? So again, depending on what you're faced with, is it an outcome we're looking for? Is it an activity we're working on? Who's responsible for it? The next one is accountable. Who has the decision-making authority? If we get to the point where we need to make a decision in between design 1 and design 2, who has that authority? Or which group of people are we going to present the options to make the decision? Because remember, as the BA, you really should not be making decisions. Okay, who needs to be consulted? So this can be a key stakeholder who should be involved in decision or work activity, right? They need to be aware. So like when we were meeting with the VP, showing the VP a document before showing it to the director. The director was not the one who was going to make a decision, it was the VP. But did we need to consult the director before going to the VP? Absolutely. Okay? Who needs to be informed? So people who need to be aware of the decision or action that have been made. Again, if you do not know all of this, ask. Anything you do not know, ask. And if you think you know, you're not 100% sure, validate what you know so that somebody can, confirm to you and say, yes, that is it, or no, that is incorrect. If you wanted to validate, where do you start from? Start from the project manager. Okay. Okay, so we're still on managing stakeholder collaboration. What are some of the techniques where, when there's conflict in a project? And conflict can be between you and a stakeholder, between two stakeholders, between two developers. Conflict can play out in many different ways. One of the ways in which people generally react to conflict is to avoid it. Refusing to acknowledge that the conflict exists in the hope that it will just go away itself. The second one is accommodate. We know the conflict is there, okay? But the stakeholders choose to be mature about the situation, and they entertain the idea from the other person. There's compete. Stakeholders are eager to force or focus their own ideas and concerns, focus on their own ideas and concerns, and may pay little attention to others. You see this compete over here. It plays out in many different ways. It's not always active. Sometimes you may be in a meeting, maybe a requirement gathering meeting. You invited someone from the marketing department, and you also invited the marketing manager. And then you start trying to get everybody to talk, and everybody is talking, but the person from the marketing department is not talking. It may be because their manager is actually in the meeting. So you need to watch out for things like that. When you're in a meeting, don't just listen to the people talking, listen to the people who are not talking as well. And if the people who are talking can't seem to keep quiet, that's one of the reasons why you're there. You need to be able to moderate it. If you have to call names and say, okay, so now we'll give an opportunity to this person to talk. Okay? Then we have compromise, which is all parties meeting in the middle. Lastly, we have collaborate, which is, a win-win situation. Everybody's working together, seamlessly. To give this context, right, let's think of it in the context of you working with stakeholders, and these are what you're seeing, avoidance, accommodation, them accommodating one another, competing, compromising, collaborate. You need to devise a way of addressing this. I can't even tell you how to address it. Imagine you have two of your friends fighting today. What would you do? It would even depend on the two friends, right? If you have one friend who's very quiet and one who can't stop talking, what would you do? You will find yourself in situations like this on the project, especially if you're meeting with more than one person at a time. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're meeting and there's somebody who's unusually quiet and you notice their boss is in the meeting. What should you do? Schedule a meeting with them without their boss. Don't try to force them to talk where their boss is unnecessarily. Okay? Because your next meeting, they may just even decline. At the end of the day, their job is more important to them than you completing your task. Because you talking to them is you completing your task and you're getting paid for it. Well, they need to stay on their job and get paid as well. So that emotional intelligence of being able to read between the lines, of being able to manage the outcomes of your meetings, of being able to see when somebody is being stifled, of being able to see when somebody is being extra quiet, trying to figure out why they're being extra quiet. You just need to, like I said, listen to what's being said and listen to what's not being said. Very important. Okay. Next thing is we're going to talk about BA governance. Okay. So I've said it multiple times that as a BA, you should not be making decisions. There's usually a governance process, right? And this involves decision makers, the process for making decisions, and the information they need to make the decision. Usually, the information they need to be able to make certain decisions will be provided by the project team, oftentimes you, the PA. For example, if they're trying to decide between two design options, right? You as a BA should not just say, well, we have option one, we have option two. What is the impact of option one? What will be the impact of option two? Give them information that will help them make an informed decision, but do not join in the decision-making process. Okay? A BA will collaborate with the PM to ensure that a proper governance process is in place. This is not like, oh, this is the BA's responsibility. Usually it is the PM's responsibility, but you work closely with the PM. Okay? BA should participate in defining how decisions will be made about requirements and design, including reviews, change control, approvals, and prioritization. So this is different from BA should participate in the decision making. It says participate in defining how decisions will be made. How are we going to communicate to the powers that be that a decision needs to be made? How are we going to document it? The request, how are we going to document the outcome? Who are we going to communicate the outcome to? Okay. So management of information, right? As a BA, over time, you're going to gather a lot of information. It'll be requirements. Sometimes it'll even be information that should be protected. For example, if you were doing return on investment and they're giving you employee salary, right? That is information that needs to be managed. We just don't want to place it where anybody would be able to see. Okay, so this here says business analysis information is comprised of all the information the BA elicits, creates, compiles, disseminates while performing work. All that information that passes through you is what we're saying in here, right? It needs to be stored properly. Find out where your company stores information. Find out how they do access management. They shouldn't give you information on employee salary and you put it in a place where anybody can view it, right? So you need to understand what the rules in your what the rules are and abide by them when it comes to protecting information or storing information. That's all we're saying here. I know it looks very verbose, but that's all we're saying here. Okay, and I think this is the last slide we'll look at today. Next class is really exciting. We're going to talk about requirement gathering, right? So anyway, this is the last slide for today. As a business analyst, you should evaluate how you're going to improve on your work. Okay, when they hire you, they may say, "Oh, this is how we do it today." If based on your experience, you know a better way of doing it, feel free to respectfully communicate it. And if your company is okay with it, they may imbibe it, they may bring it on, right? But always look for ways of improvement where possible. Some processes are just already fine, leave it alone, right? But if you find a process that isn't efficient in the way the project team does their work, feel free to make recommendations. If your company is open to it, fine. If not, fine as well. Okay. The other thing here is that we need to have performance measures. The reason we need to have that is that if we know what our performance measures are, then we'll know whether we're performing optimally or not. Okay, we need to know how we're doing from a performance standpoint. Of this total project that we need to do, we're going to be gathering requirements over a 4-month period, meaning that by the end of month one, you should have gathered 25%. If you're still on 15%, well, what's going on with our performance, right? So some of these things that I'm mentioning in here, it's not a very formal activity where you're going to prepare this elaborate documentation. No, it's really, I said to people, BA is a way of thinking and a way of being than it is a way of documenting. Because people ask me, oh, so when I get on the job, which documents do I need to prepare? As a BA on the job, people are actually more interested in talking to you than they are interested in reading your documentation. So yes, you will document. Yes, you go into the org. Yes, you do whatever you need to do. But like I always say to people, the BAs that stand out are the ones that know how to build and manage relationships. Now you're learning Salesforce, right? So are many other BAs, right? There's virtually nothing you know in Salesforce right now that maybe there isn't somebody else who knows. So how will you differentiate yourself? It's going to be by your person, right? Who you are. Your ability to capture an audience, your ability to make them to want to listen to you. Okay? So I know that was a bit of deviation, right? I was talking about performance measures. So you need to know what good performance looks like so that if you as the BA or if the project team isn't meeting up, we can course correct. What does it mean to course correct? Basically correct our course of action, right? So that we can get a different result. So we identify preventive measures, corrective measures. Maybe the reason the BAG meeting up is that the stakeholders are so busy right now, they're not able to attend meetings. Okay, what can we do differently? Right? So you can see how it's not like it's left to you to figure this out alone. You work collaboratively with your PM and your project team. Okay, so we'll stop here now and we'll take about 7 to 10 minutes of questions. If you have a question, if you don't mind raising your hand, that would be really good. Okay, Mary said, I use communication and stakeholder management plans synonymously. Fine, if that works for you, if that's what your company wants, fine. Like I always say, there are no hard and fast rules to this thing. Some companies don't even use it. If your company merges two into one, merge it into one. If they want it separately, do it separately. Most important thing is we know what these documents are, and if we're faced with them, we know how to use them. Kende said, do we usually have union reps in this group? Possibly. If you're in a unionized environment, yes. In fact, if you're in a unionized environment, just always remember union is powerful. Keep them happy. Keep them happy, okay? I worked in a place once where we were working on a project and somebody got fired because the union representative reported them. And what would they report them on? When how you have some technical issue and you need to report to service desk and they need to create a ticket. When people work on project, they want to go really fast. We don't want to create tickets. So we have this IT support guy that will just always run to and say, can you just help me? Can you just help me? And some unionized employees went to report him saying he didn't follow process. They actually fired him. So just something to mention, just because somebody talked about union, right? Is if you're working in a unionized environment, you want to keep the unionized employees happy. Okay, I'm going to see if there are any raised hands before I continue reading this comment. 1 second. Okay, we have one hand. Okay, I'm just going to quickly get through. 1 second, the comments that we have here. Ayokumi, from your experience, what are the common reasons conflicts arise while gathering requirements with stakeholders? So one of the reasons would be A says the requirement is this and B says no, it's the other way. Reality for the two parties are different. So, well, why is it different is what you, the BA, want to find out. In fact, what you're trying to find out, you may find out that's actually the reason for their pain point because they interact with the system differently and now they're getting different results. And sometimes this conflict arises from two people just not liking one another. Before they hired you, they did not like one another. It's just unfortunate now that you have to work with the two of them. There are many reasons conflict would arise. Another reason is somebody thinks the requirement is more important than the other one and should supersede the requirement the other person is giving you. Okay. Pressure says, as a BA, do you find that you are working remotely most of the time? So I work remotely. I don't, but my reality is not everybody's reality, right? I've had recruiters reaching out to me recently saying, oh, they want you at least 1 day in the office. A lot of employers are kind of asking for that, I think. But I don't know, since COVID, pre-COVID, I've worked remote. So I think it depends on who you're talking to, really. It depends on who you're talking to. But there's a fair bit of remote roles out there. Precious, I don't know if that answered your question because I don't know. I don't know the context of your question, really. Um, Kende said thank you. Okay. Precious says it did awesome. Precious said, as a BA, what's the power dynamic like between you and the PM? So usually I like to have a good relationship with my PM because it just makes my life easy and it makes the PM's life easy. I worked with a PM recently where the relationship wasn't great, unfortunately, which is not something that I like for the relationship to not be great. But I knew that, and I'm not trying to say I'm the best person in the world, right? But I knew that I wasn't the issue because there was another B on the project and he felt the same way. So, in as much as we didn't sit down chatting about the PM, because that would be gossip, right? Just from some of the meetings and outcome of some of our meetings, right? I think the organization found out too because they terminated this contract and it wasn't like any of the BA said anything to management. While he was there, though, with the relationship not being great, because it was almost like we needed to catch him up. I did enjoy the job at that time. And then they replaced him with another BM, with another PM, who honestly, there were many things she also did not know. But she would come into the meeting and ask and say, can you tell me this? Or if I use the terminology and they're like, I've actually never heard that. Can you tell me what it means? She was a humble PM, a good PM. But to answer your question, power dynamic really, a PM and a BA should work collaboratively. That's the goal. You're supporting one another, which was I was saying if the PM wasn't around, the BA is someone they would come to, right? Meaning you need to know what your PM knows, at least a lot of what they know, right? You need to work together. You need to keep them updated. A lot of what the PM is going to use in their day-to-day, like when it comes to reporting, they will come to you, the PA, to ask. So Precious, again, I hope that answers your question, but that's the way that I see it, and it's always worked for me. Even though I'm a PM myself, I'm PMP certified, I've worked on projects, I've led projects, right? But when I am the BA, I am the BA. I do not even try. Unless I see there is a gap in the project manager's work and they've asked for my opinion, because I know their job, I've done it, right? I can tell them, but I don't even try that power play. I don't. I apply to BA for a reason, right? Awesome. Okay. Vivian, go ahead, please. Your hand is raised.
Hi, Abiola.
Hi, Vivian.
Okay, thank you so much. And my question is on the stakeholder analysis. All right, so basically, I just want to understand how does the BA actually do that analysis. So is it that they try to interview the various stakeholders, and from the discussion they begin to know, okay, this one is to be satisfied, this one is to be managed closely, and all of that. And again, in I know that that very analysis too is also done by a PM. Does it mean then that a PM does their own, whatever means, whether through the interview or whatever, that like trying to know all of that, and then the BA does their own, and everybody carries like, oh, this person is the one that is highly whatever? Or do they actually come on the same, like, level ground and say, oh, okay, these are all the ones that we need to manage closely and all of that? That's my first
Okay.
question. Then this, okay,
Let me answer your
okay,
first question, Vivian, if you wouldn't
okay,
mind holding on to the second one.
sure.
So I'm not sure where you got it from that a PM does their own and a BA does their own. I'm not aware of that if that actually happens. We don't need two different people doing the analysis. And you actually don't need to go interview people to find out if, because everybody's going to think they're high power, high interest if you were to ask them, right? Everybody's like the real MVP. So no, you're not going to interview the people to know where they fall into. You're going to, so remember that the chances are they may have hired your project manager before you or not, right? So your project manager may know more than you. The project sponsor will know a lot. The project sponsor is usually high up there, so they know who's who, right? They know who can derail the project. They know who has enough power to shut it down. They know. You get some of this information from your project sponsor. Because you cannot go interview people to ask them how important they are. You can't, right? Technically, you can't, because that may even come across as disrespectful. So you talk to the people who know. Your number one person really that you and your project manager should be talking to understand this will be the project sponsor. Now, the project sponsor will give you a few names. And as you begin to talk to them, let's say you were talking to, let me just quickly go back to the diagram so I can show you what I mean. I'm still sharing my screen, right? Okay. So let's say that you wanted to find out who's low power, right? But high interest. They have high interest, but they have low power. Chances that you're going to find out from this person's manager. Because remember, these are like your end users, right? They're very interested, but they don't have any power to derail the project. And these are people typically say you're talking to the marketing manager and you're like, okay, I need to gather requirements. Who should I be talking to? And they'll be like, oh, talk to Greg, talk to Thomas, right? These are people in the marketing department or sales department. Anybody you're gathering requirement from directly usually would fall in this quadrant here. High interest, low power. So it is from you even understanding these quadrants that once you start talking to people, you have an idea of where they fall into. And if you have an idea and you're not fully sure, ask your PM, ask the project sponsor, ask the marketing manager. Don't use terminology like this when you're asking them. If you're asking the marketing manager and you're trying to figure out who should be kept informed, you're not going to say, oh, marketing manager, who should I keep informed? You know, the things you'll be asking is, so who in your department will be impacted by this solution? When we implement the solution, who is going to use it? Because there may be people in the department that work with a completely different, sorry about that, with a completely different application and will not even come into Salesforce, right? Well, those people will not fall in here. Vivian, does that to an extent answer your question?
Yes, it does. And also, when I was saying interview, of course, I know that you're not going to start asking who. I thought maybe, oh, in the course of like just talking to them, you understand. Okay, but I totally understand your angle and it makes sense. So the second one I wanted to ask is on the race metrics. So
Okay.
from like what I used to think about it was that they use it to kind of, know roles and responsibilities of the project teams, right? Like, and also like in terms of keeping
Yep. Let
in
me go
touch with
back
a
there.
milestone and deliverables. So
Yeah.
now wondering, like, okay, so this, like, my first one was actually saying it that you actually use it for stakeholder analysis, right? So I'm just trying to be sure, do you use it in this context, and as well use it to actually assign, like, assign roles and responsibilities to like the entire project team? Yeah, coming
Okay.
from the
Yeah.
PM perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, Vivian. And maybe you didn't hear me when I said it, right? When I was talking about it, I said that you can use it within the projecting context. You can also use it outside the projecting context. So to your question, yes, you can use this within the projecting. Like it is not limited to the project team. Do you understand what I mean? The concept of ratio is not limited to the project team alone. Oftentimes, it is used within the project team, like who's responsible for this user story. But think about it, within the project team, who's the decision maker? Who's making? Nobody should really be making decision in the project team. Unless maybe you have a product owner, right, who's the voice of the business on the project. So that tells you it's applicable either way, wherever your company chooses to use it. One thing I should mention though is that how is your company using it? That's what you should find out. How is your company using it? Understand the concept of RACI. That, okay, within RACI, when we talk about RACI, there's a group that's responsible, one or more people that are responsible, one or more person who's accountable, one or more person who should be consulted, and one or more person who should be informed. And then when you get on the job, right, how is this applied at your job? If within the project team they use it, fine. If outside of the project team, so the bigger stakeholder group, they use it, fine. Do you understand what I mean, Vivian?
Yes, that makes sense. So is it the BA's responsibility or the PM's responsibility?
So usually this type of communication, usually it is the PM, especially when it is outside of the project team. In fact, even within the project team. However, if you were gathering requirements, and let's say they say, oh, the requirements from the marketing department, right? From the marketing department, who's going to approve it? Who's accountable for it? You are the one who will chase this down, right? You need to know who has the decision-making authority. When you're done documenting the requirements, you validated it, somebody needs to sign off. You, the B, are the one chasing this down, which is why I said that understand the concept of RACI, and then however it is applied will determine who we're talking to, who's going to apply it. If you were using this in the context of requirement gathering, it will be you, the BA, chasing down the approval. It will be you, the BA, working with whoever is responsible to give you the requirements. However, if we were talking about race in the context of project management, it would be the PM. Do you understand what I mean, Vivian?
Yes, totally makes sense. Thank you so much for that clarification.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Did we get through all the questions? Okay, we'll take this last question. When it comes to, let me see, are there any raised hands? Mobola, we're going to have to take your question tomorrow, I think. Precious said, when it comes to moderating meetings, is that the task of the BA or the PM during demos? Well, it depends. Whose meeting is it? If this is the PM's meeting, the PM should be moderating. If it is the BA's meeting, the BA should be moderating. If you were doing a demo and you, the BA, you're the one leading the demo, you should be moderating it. Okay? Yeah, you should be moderating it. Mobola, we'll take your question tomorrow. I just want to leave the last. I should actually have stopped a while back. Give you 7 minutes to take a quick break, right? We'll talk tomorrow. Please be there tomorrow. I know a lot of people have been asking me about requirement gathering. Tomorrow is when we start having the conversation. Please be here, and I look forward to connecting with you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day or evening.
Thank you, Abiola.